What's up? It's Julian, back with another tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to make some synths for lo-fi house music. I have this loop, which you already heard in the intro, so I'm only going to play a second of it. That one, just a pretty standard like lo-fi house type of loop, I suppose. And that's 4 elements. It's this cassette noise, this chord, this lead sound, and then this bass. So, anyway, I'm just going to dive in on the chord to begin with. So I want to say, this is a major 7th chord. It's a G major 7. And the purpose of that is, these kind of chords are used a lot in this type of music. And this is really a big thing to it. It is about the sound design, yes, and about making your sounds kind of like nasty and raw and textured and all that. But you really got to get the right melodic, or the right music theory going into it as well. And I'm by no means an expert on music theory, but I do know like what works and what you need to use for this style. And major 7th chords and minor 7th chords are used a lot in this style. They're just very jazzy. They have that sort of like 90s house edge to them. And yeah, it just works very well here. So that's what I have. It's just this G major 7 the whole way through. But there's some stuff with the synth that makes it a bit more interesting and keeps it moving throughout the track. So what we have is, I'll show you the blank. I made this an operator and then I put all this processing on it, which I'll show you in a second. So what we have here is, this is just the operator patch. So you can hear, the sound is there, but it's definitely like buried underneath all those layers of effects when the effects are there. And rightfully so, that's what the effects are for. But what we have here is, we have a saw wave. And I haven't touched the attack or the decay or the sustain or the release. And it's just a standard saw wave. You can do this in any synth. You just need a saw wave and a filter, I guess, and some noise. So I just have the saw wave on the first oscillator, and then I have the noise on the second oscillator. Just like standard white noise. You can hear that's just adding a little bit of high end, a little bit of grittiness that comes through when we start distorting it a little bit later. And after that I just put this filter on, which sounds like this. And all that's doing is just obviously cutting out the high frequencies, making it a little bit smoother of a sound. It's closer to a sine wave now, but it has a bit more harmonics. And I have the resonance up a little bit, which will come into play later. But without it, it sounds like this. So even now you can hear it just kind of sounds a little bit dull without that resonance. A little bit muffled, just not muffled in the good way, like the way we want for this kind of music, just sort of muffled. So what I did here, this is the little bit of an interesting thing I did in operator here. And this is, again, you can do this in any synth. I have this LFO on the filter frequency. That's how this is routed here. And what I did was, so it's a sine wave, that just means it's moving the thing as a sine wave. I turn off the sync, so it's not synced to any subdivision of the tempo, or like any, like note, like 16th notes, 8th notes, whatever. It's synced to, or just set to the rate, which is a frequency, because this is the low frequency oscillator. It's literally an oscillator. So this is just the frequency this is set to, is how fast it's moving this filter frequency. And then I have the amount set about there, so it's not opening it and closing it completely, but it is opening it and closing it enough. So that sounds like this. So that's pretty cool, and that'll come into play later. But you hear what that does. The reason for doing this is because without it, this is a very static sound. It's one chord, and it's not really changing a whole lot throughout the track. Or we only have 4 bars now, but in theory, you would just have this pad sort of held out throughout the track. So this makes it a little bit more dynamic, gives it a little bit more going on, and a little bit of movement, because we're not getting movement in the music, like the actual chords it's playing. It's not playing like any kind of pattern, it's just playing one chord. So we need to give it some movement. And that's what this is for. So after that, I put on this ping-pong delay. You could do this with any stereo delay. I just use the Ableton one, because I'm giving away this project file, and I want this to be something that everybody can open. So I'm going to give away this project file as well as loops of all this and the MIDI, and you'll be able to open this up in Ableton or open it up in whatever DAW you use, and hopefully explore a little bit for yourself. So I put this ping-pong delay on. I turn up the dry wet, which is just how much of the wet signal, the affected signal, is playing versus how much of the clean signal, which has none of the effect on it, is playing. I turn up the feedback, which is just the amount of repeats, like how, like, you know, how many times it does that, how many times it repeats. I just turn that up a little bit because default, it's like, or I turn it down, excuse me. By default, it's at 60%. I set it to 51%. But either way, yeah, I have it playing 16th notes, which is what this setting is. And I have the filter set like this, which you could do in most delays. Just have like a filter on them that you can do that. And that sounds like this. So you can hear what it's doing is it's sort of like not distorting. It's sort of just making the sound a little bit more. It's obscuring the sound a little bit. It's making the sound like a little bit less obvious, I guess. A little bit like more airy and a little bit more ambient. So yeah, that's what we want. After that, I put this reverb on. I didn't touch anything except for the decay time and the dry wet, which I know for a fact on these I turned them down just because I didn't want them to be as wet and as long. The decay time is just how long the reverb goes out for. Dry wet, same thing as the delay, just the dry signal versus the wet signal. And I just didn't want it to be as wet and as long of a decay as it had by default. Now this one is where we start to get into something I want to cover here. This is really working with the synth to create the sound. I'll show you what happens. You hear when the filter opens up, it's not so accentuated now, but it will be later when we get to more of the processing. As the filter opens up, this reverb sort of goes like with it, and that that helps move the sound along. That's what we want. And what we're doing is we're not just putting effects on to put a reverb on, to put a delay on. We're putting them on for reasons. There's like a reason why we're using this reverb. There's a reason why we're using this delay. And that's the most effective way to use these tools for sound design, is really to like make them make them all work together. Like you want the set there to be a reason why you do everything. And in this case, this is ours. And yeah, so the synth is working with the effects to make the sound. That's very important. After that, I might get roasted for this. I got roasted for this in my other two videos. But I put on a bit warmer, the saturator preset. And what that does is basically, as the title describes, it just makes it a bit warmer, a bit fatter. It's adding some harmonics over top of the sound and making it a little bit crunchier. And just a little bit generally like more analog sounding, which is really what we want with Lo-Fi House. We want it to sound like it's on a tape that's been played and played and played from like the 90s or something. I don't know. But yeah, so I'll play that. And it's also, this is another thing where it's working with the synth. So this isn't coming through so much now, but it will be in a moment. This distortion with the resonance on the filter is working with the resonance on the filter. So like when the filter opens up, it's sort of distorting that resonant thing I was talking about earlier, where that little tone that it provides. And just making it a lot like nicer and sort of gelling everything together really well. We're really making this like a very nice, lush, thick, warm, analog-y sound. And that's what we want. So after that, the next two things, I just added this vinyl distortion and this a bit warmer. Both of them are pretty subtle, but they're pretty much just acting to do the same thing, adding a bit of distortion to bring out that filter more. And so yeah, that sounds like this. So you can hear now, you can really hear like the filter, the sound is being made a lot warmer by those. The filter is, that resonance is really getting brought out nicely. After that, I won't show those, I'm going to get blasted. But after that, I just put this filter, this auto filter on, and the only purpose of that is just a low pass filter. It's not moving or anything, it's not automated either. It's really just to cut out, there was a little bit of nasty high frequencies that were coming through when I put all of this other processing on it. So I just put that on there to tame those. And since most of this sound is happening in this area, by cutting it here, we're not really taking away from the sound, but we can eliminate the things that are getting amplified by all this. So after that, I put on these two multiband compressors. And what multiband compression does is, so compression is like, it takes sounds that are quieter than the peak, the loudest thing, and brings them up to that loudness, depending on how you set it, right? And that's how multiband compression works, but it does it with these splits, by frequency bands that you set on the compressor. And yeah, so basically what I did with these, I didn't use these for actual mixing compression, like for the purpose of like shaping my sounds dynamically. I use them for sound design because what it can do is it can make your sounds be very like over compressed, so to speak, in a very tasteful and nice way sometimes and sometimes not. This technique is actually used a lot in EDM, but we're not using it for that here, obviously. But yeah, I'm using it here to just sort of bring up the sound a bit, make it a little bit flatter and like a little bit more squashed, but in a way that's like, that works for the sound and gives it more of like a tape, lo-fi type of sound. So that sounds like this. And you can hear that brings out the harmonics from the distortion as well, a lot more. So after that, I got into these limiters. I put 3 of these limiters on here. And I'll show you, that's where it really becomes the sound that you heard. So at this point, the filter sweep, we're hearing the filter sweep. You're hearing the delay obscuring it. You're hearing the reverb when the filter opens up. You're hearing these distortions, obviously, because they're getting, you're hearing it sound kind of crunchy. And then all this is just to make it sort of, give it that last little bit of like oomph, to like take it over the edge from like a pretty good sound that does what we want it to do to like really sounding like a sound that's in a track and really sounding proper. So after this, I worked on the lead. I mean, that's pretty much it for the chord. After that, I just worked on the lead, which sounds like this. And with the music theory here, it's pretty simple. It's just this melody that I believe is in G major, so it just fits the key of the chord. And it's just all about, like, tasteful choice of notes, really. Like, you really just want to just think about every note and the placement of every note and just really spend as much time as you can to get it just to sound right, I mean, it either is good or it isn't. That's as simple as it is. And yeah, so that's what I have here. And this is a very rhythmic melody. Obviously, you see it's got all these jumps. But that's what we want because the chord is so static and so simple that the melody has to sort of bounce a lot more. And I just put this little groove on here, which just adds a little bit of swing. You can do this in Logic and FL Studio as well, with the little swing bar that they have in there, I guess. But yeah, and then I just put this little track delay on. What this does is just moves the MIDI forward a little bit. You can literally do the same thing by just zooming in and moving it like that. It's the exact same thing. And the purpose of that is it just adds it just sort of moves it forward a little bit, and when you have some drums and with the bass line I'll show you, you can see it sort of like helps the groove along a bit more and just makes it a little bit more human, a little bit more analog, a little bit more realistic. And that's really what we're going for here, especially with this style of music. Like I'm saying, like it's so much about making it sound like, all analog and natural. And that's what we want. So that's the music section of this. Now I'm going to show you the synth. So it's just this operator patch, which I am using the FM on here, with some effects that sort of take it over the edge, like I was saying. So to start with, it's just a basic sine wave. And I mean, nothing special there. It's just, the notes playing on a sine wave. I set the sustain and decay and release on here like this, just to be basically like a little pluck sound, just like a little dong. You don't want it to be, if I just leave it. I guess in this case it doesn't do too much, but that little sustain does actually matter when you start to have the FM in here. So next I just put this oscillator on, and that's frequency modulating this one. That's what FM synthesis stands for, obviously. And so that makes it sound like this. So that's where it really gets that kind of like deep house sound from. And if you play this lower, I'll show you. Start to get those kind of like deep house basses. So that's pretty interesting. But basically what that is it's just set an octave up from the first one, which is what really starts to matter with FM synthesis. Like the octave you set the modulator to, I guess. Man, Wow. And then I just messed with the sustain and decay on this one and the release and set it very similar to this one and turned it up to about there. The last thing I did on the operator patch here is I set the LFO like this, and by default it's just set to these pitch things. You can do this on any other FM synth as well. You would just set it to like the pitch of the oscillators. And I didn't do too much. It's only at 5% or 5.3%. The rate is set like that. Same thing as the chord. I set it so it's not synced to the BPM. And you can just hear that sort of gives it a little bit more like analogness. It makes the pitch like warble, so to speak. And yeah, it just sounds like it's on like a tape or something. I mean, that's the best way I can say it. So after that, the processing is very similar to the chords, so I'm just going to run through it. I just have this delay doing 16th notes. This little reverb here that's just set like this. So those are what gives it like the space in the track, and sort of make it sound like it's in the track and like in the space that all this other stuff is in, is just this delay and reverb. And yeah, so after that I just put this overdrive on. It's just a standard Ableton overdrive. I turned the resonance on this filter on here up all the way. And then I turned the tone down all the way, and I set the dry wet all the way up, put the drive to there. And what that does is it makes it sound like this. So you can hear it's a little bit nasty, it's a little bit like digital clipping type of sound, but I mean, it's not horrible, and ultimately it suits the song pretty well. You can hear it also, like, when that pluck hits, it sort of, like, distorts it a little bit, which is nice and gets brought out by these other things. So after that, I put on the 2 a bit warmers, which just take this further. Like, as per usual, they just sort of make it a little bit fatter, a little bit thicker sounding, and yeah. After that, I just put this auto filter on. Just to sort of calm it down a little bit, make it sound... Honestly, I wanted it to sound kind of vaporwavy, I guess. And then I just put a multiband compressor on, same one as the chord, and this limiter on, same one as the chord. And it's the same reason. I just wanted to bring out all the delay and reverb and all the frequencies in there. And yeah, so that just kind of ties it all together like this. So that's how we get that sound. Now the bass is a very similar sound, and I'm not necessarily going to go over the processing because it's the exact same processing as the lead. I just copied it down, and yeah, it worked. So I'll turn off the processing on the bass and show you. This is just another simple operator patch. And I just have the notes here are just the notes of a G major 7 chord, just sort of with this like arpeggio pattern. And then I have the groove on here, same one that I put on the lead. And the purpose of this is just the bass line is like where a lot of your groove comes from in the track, you know, in this kind of music. And so I couldn't just make it like one held out note like the chords. You sort of want it to be sort of bouncy. And these notes sounded good with the melody as well. Like, it was cool how they sort of play off of each other to me. So that's what I did there. And yeah, and like I said, you just want your bass line to be very bouncy with this kind of music because, like, you want that. That's where the groove is coming from. The relationship between the kick and the bass. So yeah, that's what you gotta have. Now this is just another operator preset, like I said. I started with this sine wave. It's just on the default FM algorithm. And I started with this sine wave, which I set like this. You can hear that's just like in the very low frequencies. You might not even be able to hear that if you're listening on a phone or something. I just set the sustain and decay like this. And then I put on this other operator modulating it. And the sustain and decay are set like this. You can just see it, and you can see the project file as well if you download it. It's similar. I think I may have actually started with the preset from this, but it's similar to the lead where it's just up an octave and turned up like that. That's where we start getting a little bit more harmonics in the sound, and it's more than just the sine wave. And then finally I just added on this third one. It's not too loud. It's set default as far as the pitch, but I have the sustain and decay set like this, and the release set like that as well. And that just adds a little bit more grit. I'll show you. You can't hear it so much now, but when the distortion and the processing are on, you can really hear it. After that, the last thing I did here was I just added this pitch envelope. And what I did was I set it all the way up, but I set the decay very, very low. Because by default, I'll show you, it sounds like this. Which is like obviously not what we want. It's like, you know, like so I set it like this. And again, you can't hear that much now, but you can when you hear all the distortion and compression on it. That just makes it more of like a hit as opposed to just like this mellow sound. It makes it more like it makes it hit harder, like more like a pluck, I guess. But yeah, it just sounded good to me when I had the processing on it. So that with the processing, like all the effects, which are the exact same ones I showed you were on the lead, sounds like this. So a pretty cool sound. It's got a lot of texture to it, and it fits in the atmosphere of the track. So anyway, yeah, that's pretty much just this thing. Like I said, I'll have the project file, the MIDI files, some audio loops of this, all in the description below. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for all the support, guys. It really means so much. Like all the great feedback I've been getting on these videos and the subscribers. It just means so much. Like, thank you. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, go back and check out my other videos. Hopefully you can learn something there pretty similar to this, but obviously different content in them. And yeah, just I hope you learned something from this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it made your day better, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, just leave a like, subscribe, please, comment, and hopefully share this with some friends if you liked it. I really appreciate it. I'll be back in another day with another tutorial, and yeah, peace.